that he thinks government should be judged on how they treat the most vulnerable people in the community. Well, I'd like him to know that that's exactly how this government will be judged on the 26th of November, because if fairness is to be the benchmark, then the record of National, ACT, the Māori Party and Peter Dunn is shameful, sir. It's shameful. No matter how many catwalks John Key struts down, he's not going to be able to hide the fact that his government is just failing hard-working Kiwis. No amount of smiling and waving will be able to hide the most worrying gap that New Zealanders face, the rapidly widening gap between what John Key promised in 2008 and the grim reality that we all now face. Because that reality is now international, that ordinary people are just worse off. And no amount of spin from the Prime Minister's PR team can hide the fact that prices are rising faster than wages. He can smile all he likes about raising GST, but at the end of the day, Kiwis know that the real effect is that they have to pay a lot more for a lot less at the supermarket checkout. Mr Key can smile all he likes about rebalancing the economy, but at the end of the day, Kiwis feel in their pockets that prices are rising a lot faster than their wages. The PM can smile all he likes about leading a government of aspiration, but at the end of the day, Kiwis know that there are no jobs and that there's no plan. They know that the brighter future he promised isn't coming, and I have to laugh when I hear Mr Boscawen talk about the promise to stem the net migration to Australia. There are 1,000 Kiwis leaving these shores a week for Australia at the moment, 2 jumbo jets leaving because they know there's no plan for recovery in this country. And Mr Boscawen asked the price of electricity in Australia. What he needs to understand is that when Australia puts a price on carbon, as it undoubtedly will, finally New Zealand's renewable advantage will be recognised. And a lot of people who think that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence on electricity prices will have a big surprise coming. But sir, on November the 26th, New Zealanders are going to have a very clear choice. They can stick with the government that's got us to the point where we've got 158,000 people out of work, including 25,000 Māori and almost 40,000 young people. The government claims it's aspirational, but to have almost 30,000 young people aged 15 to 24 out of work and in no form of training or education is shameful. So people could choose to stick with the Prime Minister who promised not to raise GST and then did. The Prime Minister who said he'd make sure early childhood education remained free, but then cut its funding so that fees have to rise far beyond what a lot of ordinary families can afford. They can choose to keep a Prime Minister who obviously has no plan to create jobs or grow our economy, but who's hell-bent on selling off assets that all New Zealanders already own, cut public service jobs and benefits to all New Zealanders and borrow hundreds of millions of dollars at the expense of ordinary Kiwis in order to fund unaffordable tax cuts. But there is a fairer option, sir, a Labour-led government. Government should be judged, as Mr Key said earlier, on how they treat the most vulnerable members of our society. But the difference is that our actions are going to match our words. A Labour government will not borrow for tax cuts, raise GST or sell off assets that we already own. Our team has a plan. We will put middle-income New Zealanders at the core of what we do and create jobs and growth by investing in research and development, boosting skills and trade training, changing the way monetary policy works so we actually do support our productive exporting sector, and making sure that we own our own future by preventing the indiscriminate sale of farmland and other strategic assets that ought to always stay in Kiwi ownership. Sir, I have the privilege of being Labour's environment spokesperson, and I was delighted to be here earlier in the House to hear the excellent contribution from Kevin Haigh when he spoke about the shabby record that this government has on environmental matters. Anybody listening to the outcome of the Blue-Greens, so-called Blue-Greens conference in Christchurch a couple of weekends ago would absolutely despair at the direction that this government is taking New Zealand on the environment. I don't know how John Key and Nick Smith expect us to have a brighter future if they're bent on destroying the environment that our future and our economy depends on. It's amazing to me that National would so undemocratically push through so-called national standards in schools, while at the same time Nick Smith wants to relax the standards for the air that we breathe. In allowing more air pollution for a longer period of time, members on that side of the House need to know that the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research says that we'll see 635 avoidable deaths from respiratory illness. Jackie Dean thinks that's funny, but I think anybody looking at it objectively wouldn't have that smile on their face, as well as 505 unnecessary hospital admissions and over 1 million extra sick days. That isn't a laughing matter, Ms Dean. That's something that any government putting in place those decisions ought to hang their head in shame about. The fact that John Key can talk about looking after the sick and the vulnerable while allowing decisions like this speaks volumes about the utter lack of compassion from members on that side of the House. Sir, what I think is most telling about National's lack of commitment to the environment is the refusal to set a 2020 target for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Any government can wax lyrical about window dressing and statements, as Nick Smith did a couple of weekends ago, about a 2050 target years and years away in the future. But that's not showing real commitment to putting immediate actions in place to match their words. And of course there's a reason why we're not going to see a 2020 target for greenhouse gas pollution reduction. This government wouldn't be able to meet one because every policy they've implemented in this term has made pollution rise rather than fall in the long term. They've watered down the emissions trading scheme. Mr Boscawen very conveniently failed to mention that, so that it effectively operates as a massive... Oh, well, he says he did, but it was so hard to understand what he was saying, I didn't realise it. They've watered it down so that it effectively operates as a massive subsidy from taxpayers to big polluters. They've done away with Labor's biofuels obligation. They've scrapped Labor's plan to have 90% of energy generated from renewables by 2025. There's been an absolute failure to invest in public transport. Ms Dean, the genius on the benches opposite, says it's not possible. It is possible, Ms Dean. Read the energy strategy that your government watered down, where there was a plan to get to exactly that target. And what happened? Jerry Brownlee abolished it. Jerry Brownlee abolished it because he's got no commitment to the environment, just like all the ministers in that government on that side. Sir, in government, Labor would commit strongly to supporting industries like clean tech, which has the potential not only to help save our environment, but add value in the order of, say, 10% extra to our economy. But it's things like clean tech which are jeopardised by National's approach to policy. Many fledgling clean tech companies just can't succeed without access to research and development assistance, like the tax credits which National slashed. And there's no point trying to sincerely market New Zealand's clean tech businesses when the other government policies that I've mentioned already, sir, are fast destroying the clean image that we rely on to trade internationally. The clean tech industry is something amazing which should be nurtured, but I fear that it may never get the head start it needs when National are in charge. Sir, nobody looking at the record could rationally have any confidence in this government because they've failed Kiwis and they have no plan. There's no plan and no regard for the well-being of ordinary working New Zealanders, and I'm proud, sir, to be part of the team which does have a plan and which will offer Kiwis a real alternative on November 26.